Hi guys. We're women in vinyl, and as you can see from our t-shirts,
We all match.
we all match. So we,
Unintentionally.
unintentionally, yeah, this was not planned. We
No,
tend to favor black shirts a lot, but to have matching actual shirts is just funny. But speaking of, oh nice, Lenny's is wearing hers too. We'll tell you guys more about our women in vinyl merch in a sec. But you guys are here for a more important topic, which is learning how to release your music on vinyl, especially as an indie artist and doing it yourself. There are many avenues and many options, but it not a lot of people know what their options are. So our goal here is to make sure that we share as much information as we have, so that you guys can make wise decisions for your music and your budget. So let us get started by introducing ourselves. We are Women in Vinyl, and I'll have our founder, Miss Jen DiEugenio, introduce us and what we do.
Yeah, so I'm Jen. I founded Women in Vinyl back in 2018. It started as a blog and has expanded quite a bit over the last year. Um, I work at Furnace Record Pressing as the sales and customer experience manager. And so I'll be able to speak from a pressing plant perspective. And then we have the wonderful Jet and Robin, who are part of our board. And I'll let them introduce themselves. And then not with us today on the panel, but an integral part of the board is Amanda McCabe. She's fantastic, works for Universal. Jet, Robin.
go ahead,
Okay,
Jen.
you get started, Robin. Go, share what you do.
Oh, okay. So I'm Robin. I am co-host of the Women in Vinyl podcast. And I also am a record cutter up here in Toronto. I am a solo operation, and I work on short run lathe cut records, which means I circumvent the pressing plant model and kind of do smaller runs, depending, and try and be a bridge for people to understand their options in making records, especially when they're smaller, independent, self-financed, and maybe not ready for the pressing plant model yet. Yeah, that's kind of what I do.
And I'm Jet, one of the board members of Women in Vinyl, and I'm a mastering engineer slash vinyl cutter. So, mastering engineer, we tend to be the very last stage in the music production process before it goes out into commercial marketplace. And we also, as a vinyl cutter, I work on the very first stage of the standard vinyl manufacturing process, where we cut the music into an actual physical master. So we're going to talk about that more later. I work at the bakery here in Los Angeles, and I got connected with Women in Vinyl because of the internet. And and for us to find our tribe in this world that tends to be a mystery to a lot of people that are not in the industry. It's always good to find your community, and to be able to give back and empower more women to get into this industry. So yeah, that's who we are, and we're gonna get started with our discussion here, which is vinyl. So let's have Robin talk about why you want to release your music on vinyl in the first place.
Okay, so releasing vinyl is not only a fad, and it's kind of, I mean, as we all know, vinyl is cool. So you want to be cool. You want to be a member of the cool kids club. So of course you want to put your music on vinyl, but it's one of those things where your music actually becomes real. And I've grown to understand that from the people that I work with, because I work with them usually on a very one-to-one artist basis, where I actually get to give them their records, which isn't usually how it works in a pressing plant scenario, because they're shipping boxes and stuff. But sometimes people come to the studio and actually pick up their records, and they get to have that oh my God, this is my record moment, which I live for, and I think it's the best thing in the universe. But it's also a way to give something to your fans that is a teeny tiny piece of you. So there's a tangible moment where they actually get to own something that is yours. And it's a physical relationship with that piece of music where you actually take it out of the sleeve or the jacket and you put it on the turntable and you put your stylus down and you listen to it. And sometimes that listening environment is so much more better, and you get to hear the music on a different in a different way and appreciate it differently, rather than like you're on the bus or you're on the train and you're driving and you're streaming it. Now you're actually like paying attention and maybe looking at the jacket or the liner notes or whatever is included with that, seeing a bigger picture rather than the teeny tiny little one that's on your like on your iPhone, and you're, oh, that looks like Beyonce, I think. So there's multiple ways that vinyl is like a really fun product, but it's also kind of there's a price point associated with it, but it's also that relationship. So yeah, people have a better experience with the music while the record is on vinyl, but it also can turn into a merch point and something that you can sell that's not necessarily another black t-shirt that we all have scads and scads of. So sometimes releasing vinyl can be more of an investment, and sometimes it can be a quick way to get your music out into a market that you haven't necessarily been in before.
Anything you want to add, Jen?
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. You know, I think having that tangible thing really does make it feel real, you know? So
I agree.
Yeah.
And also just to add to the physical ownership part, one thing that a lot of young music enthusiasts tend to not realize is even with streaming becoming more and more popular and ubiquitous, at the end of the day, you still don't own the music. Even if you're a premium user and you can download the music, the fact that you're using the streaming platform, you're essentially just paying for the license to download and listen to the music. If the license for that music internationally stops becoming available, or like there are things that suddenly changed with the rights, and they choose to take down their music, that music's going to disappear on your library as well, even though you've already downloaded. Um, so that's I was really distraught when an independent, not so popular, but it's a cult favorite artist that I used to follow, suddenly her music disappeared on my library. And really, the best way, even with streaming, making music discovery so much more easy and accessible, you still would want to get a physical copy of your music, because that's essentially the only legitimate way that you really get to own the music. So
Yeah, it's your
right?
truly archival piece in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let me talk about the caveats of releasing your music on vinyl. So, not a lot of people tend to be aware of the things you have to be mindful of when you make the decision to release on vinyl. So, number one, longer manufacturing timeline. I used to have a client that's releasing their music on vinyl on their own for the first time, and they said, "I need the vinyl records ready by a month." And yeah, please connect me with a pressing plant that can release my vinyl records in a month. So you think that 1 month turnaround time is long enough, right? Wrong. um, on a good year before the pandemic, you're looking into about 3 to 6 months of turnaround time for your actual records to be on your hands. But because of like the past 2 years, things have changed, and we're going to go into more detail on that in a bit. But now you're looking into about 6 months to 1 year of turnaround time for vinyl. So just keep that in mind when you know that you're going to be releasing music on vinyl, that you really need to be prepared way in advance, if you're working with a timeline. Next is higher upfront costs, just because of all the raw materials that are used throughout the process and the fact that you are selling a physical product, there is going to be higher upfront costs compared to other formats. So, any questions you guys have about the actual costs, we'll be happy to help you guys out. But just make sure to budget accordingly if you know that you're releasing your music on vinyl. Now, the third caveat here, the need to educate your audience about the format. We will give you a little story about this. When Taylor Swift released her vinyl recently, yep. Well, tell us about it, Robin.
I'm just going to preface this with, I think that this is one of the funniest moments of vinyl in history.
And that we want everybody to get into records, but this was pretty joyous.
Yes.
Yeah.
and that's one of the things that we really champion in Women in Vinyl specifically, is that we're not audiophiles by any stretch of the imagination. We're never going to judge you with your playback systems or like what you're playing your records on, what records you're playing. We're pumped that you want to listen to records at all, not only because it allows us to all have jobs, but also because it's our favorite thing too. So some people might not be aware, but when Taylor Swift reissued Red on the Super Mega Ultimate box set that spanned 4 records, those records were actually pressed at 45 RPM. And unfortunately, there was no indication that they were made at 45 RPM on the actual box set, nor on the record.
I did not know that there was no indication. What the hell?
So I love the Swifties, and I'm a card-carrying Swiftie as well. I love Taylor Swift, but it's a missed opportunity, definitely in the marketing, in marketing for sure. But her legions of fans went to the internet to review the record, saying that how upset they were that there was a man singing all of her songs and it wasn't Taylor Swift. And I don't know why, but it became this like incredible moment of joy for me to read all of them, because I found them so funny that a lot of, and I'm going to say kids because that's the majority of them, instead of trying to fix the problem on their own, they just went right to the internet to complain about this rather than trying another speed on their turntable, potentially because they don't know enough about the turntable. And again, that's why we exist, to try and bridge that gap, fill that niche of information without shaming anybody and without being like, oh, hey, there's a button. You can hit it and everything's all good. But
yeah.
So
Right.
There's differences in speed and there's differences in formats. There's 7-inch records, there's 10-inch records, there's 12-inch records. There's different capacities on all of those records. And if you want to go check out the Women in Vinyl podcast, you can learn all about records on our Tech Talks.
Yep.
Vinyl 101.1 and 101.2. We break down all the differences between different formats, different parts of the record, and why one might be better than the other.
Exactly.
Yep. So yeah, it's your responsibility as the artist to make sure that your fans are able to listen to your music effectively on a format that they're not that well versed yet. Like I know that there are a lot of vinyl enthusiasts that admittedly collect vinyl records even though they don't have turntables, and that is part of the enjoyment of vinyl collection. But you still have to make sure that your audience knows how to play your record. So make sure to indicate the speed, most importantly. So that's one of the things you have to be mindful of when you're releasing your music on vinyl.
I think too, I'll just add to that right now, because we're getting into the delays, educate on turn times as well, because a lot of people out there right now are really shaming the plants as if we want to hold your records captive, and we don't. So there are things that I'll talk about here in a minute that are causing those delays, and the more people can understand at the consumer level, the better for everybody. So
yeah, Exactly, and also it's like so many things are starting to pop up. I remember, you also need to educate your listeners, and you as the artist, need to manage expectations in terms of the sound of your music on vinyl, because a lot of
Yes.
people tend to expect a digital sound
Yeah.
when you're listening to music on the vinyl format. Ticks and noise, surface noise, are part of our daily lives, and so is in the vinyl format. So there are going to be like severe clicks and ticks that you want to avoid, but there is going to be physical noise that is going to be part of the format. So it's good to be mindful of that, and manage your expectations. So, all right. Jen, can you tell us what is causing the 2021 vinyl delays?
Yes, and I think to start, well, to talk about 2021, we have to go back to 2020 to just quickly start with the whole lacquer fire at Apollo. That was sort of the first hit to the industry because at that time it was right before COVID hit, and that already caused a little bit of a wave because everyone was trying to figure out where to get their lacquers from if they weren't already using MDC, which is the main Japanese supplier and now our only supplier. So, Apollo was facilitating a huge part of the market. And so when that happened, everybody was scrambling and then COVID hit. And so then everybody shut down. So that already is going to put, a delay on how things are happening. So then as everybody started to open back up, obviously there's a log jam in supply because of the demand. And then into this year, we started having shortages of raw materials. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is copolymer, which is a part of PVC, is hard to get right now. So shortages in that cause problems with us being able to press records at all because we can't get the material. And then the other thing to take into account with that is that everybody's home, right? So everybody's doing home renovations. Well, records aren't the only thing that use PVC. So your vinyl flooring and any sort of other piping, that's all PVC as well. So what we need, the PVC for pressing plants, is actually a cleaner kind of PVC. It takes more processing. And so that process is taking longer as well. So when you add all of those things together and then you have to ship them on a boat because there's less international flights, and then there are port closures and ships getting stuck in canals and all
Yep.
kinds of crazy things that you could not predict happen. That is one of the reasons why, we're having issues. I mean, we even see like clear vinyl. We don't know when we're going to be able to get more clear vinyl. Just the suppliers are like, can't get it. The materials that we need to make that aren't available. So it's just day to day figuring that stuff out, different colors and what we can get and what we can't get. And then there's also port strikes. And all of these things are causing prices to go up too. So it's like, cardboard pricing. I mean, it's just across the board. Like you wouldn't even believe it. Paper, like black paper sleeves are hard to get. So
Wow.
it's just, one day, it's literally one day at a time. So the more understanding again that everybody can be about these kinds of things, the better. I hear like, a lot of labels and record stores even are really frustrated because they're having to raise the price, that they're selling the record at because the plants are raising the prices. And I think, again, everybody just needs to understand that that's a trickle down effect. Like pressing plants can't absorb all of the cost or you won't have anybody to make your records. So that has to be passed on. And something we talk about all the time on the podcast is actually, keep their jobs and go to work. Because even though like technically vinyl probably isn't, a must have, it has been able to stay open as a manufacturing process through all of this. So safety and all of that is a concern as well. So yeah, I mean, I think some other things we have on here, like geopolitical issues, like Brexit, shipping, we're definitely seeing stuff with that. A lot of the cost, like your VAT within Europe, if you're shipping within Europe has gone up because they're doing a lot of economical type things to better the planet on their side of the world. So it really is. It's been like a puzzle trying to get records out over the past year.
Anything to add, Robin?
Just expanding on what Jen is saying, and there's because materials are coming from different parts of the world. There's mini log jams all the way along the production chain, whether it's new pressing plants open, trying to find mastering engineers that have lathes, and then there's a finite number of people that can actually cut those records, whether that's into lacquer or into copper, and then the ability to get lacquers. And then you've got a limited number of galvanics plants that are able to transform those masters into plates, and then those plates go to the pressing plant. So you've got mini log jams all the way to there.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah. You've got capacity issues, not just one person, one artist, one label deciding that they're going to make 500,000 records for one artist. That's not all to blame for other people's delays, but it's also, there's only a maximum capacity of how many records can be made in a certain year, given staffing, given production materials, given all of those things already.
Even cycle times.
Yeah, and then you've got the understanding through the pandemic that people don't want to work in factories for less than a certain number, like a dollar number.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got staffing challenges, as well as like a little bit of a brain drain. Maybe people are moving out of bigger centers to go prioritize their quality of life somewhere else. So there's like those kind of considerations. Then you've got more governmental taxes on things to offset carbon usage. And as we know, vinyl uses carbon products. We're not independent of oil and gas at this point. So there's like those kind of considerations as well. And we're like Jen said, like vinyl is cool and it's a fun thing that's nice to have. But at the end of the day, there's still maybe 25 people in that chain that touch that record before it actually gets to the consumer. So there's kindness and understanding that needs to be expressed in all of that manufacturing chain, but as well as like it's people, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, this is a good problem to have, right? Because we all love records. And so it's great that there's this demand. And so I think that from the perspective of this panel, something that is really going to be interesting in helping an independent artist put out their record is to understand that you can still hit release dates with everything that's going on. You just have to understand your timeline and how to plan ahead for it. So it's not the end of the world, and vinyl isn't going anywhere. And so you should still invest in it. It's just you have to plan appropriately with your marketing and your distributor to have these kinds of conversations and know, like, okay, it's going to take longer. And another thing, I guess, and we'll probably get into this, is, we were just talking the other day, hitting your dates. Like if I, from a pressing plant perspective on the sales side, tell you I have to have something in by this date, it's not like a guess. Like I need it in by that date, because we're having to order PVC 5 months out, 6 months out to make sure that you're going to have that color that you want in time. So if I don't have your color at that time, I don't have your artwork at that time, I'm not able to process things with the delays down the supply chain to get it here in time for your release date. So it's so important that you're hitting those dates that you're given.
Mm-hmm. And also, again, not to just to encourage you guys to still consider vinyl, even with all these different factors of the delays in 2021. There's actually more and more pressing plants that are popping up all over the world. So there is already some improvement from the past 2 years where there's like delays in the pipeline. So and as we're gonna go through the slides later, you have many options to consider for releasing your music on vinyl. So we shall proceed. 3 stages of vinyl manufacturing. This is very important information to know as an independent artist, because understanding the whole process gives you a better chance of making the right decisions for you and your budget. So, Miss Robin, can you um, go through this 3 stages of vinyl manufacturing for us?
Yeah. So as we kind of discussed, that we're, as cutting people, Jet and myself, we're at the kind of the last stage of the creative process and the first stage of the production process. So Jet cuts lacquers, I cut plastic, and so Jet's a mastering engineer. I don't like to call myself a mastering engineer because I feel like what I do is a little bit less precise than what mastering engineers
You're a mastering engineer, girl.
because lacquers are so permanent, and then they get transformed into these like metal things, and then they go off to make like thousands and millions of copies, and I just get to hyper focus on a shorter run, and if I make a mistake, I can do another one right away. If they make a mistake, it's
Permanent.
way bigger problem. So that's
Yeah. So for those who have no idea what we're talking about, there are many options for you to release your music on vinyl. So we'll go through that later. But yeah, we're both in the very first stage, which is the actual cutting process. So yeah.
Cutting is taking the files and transforming them into the actual physical medium, and that's like the first step of that, where it's like, okay, this is cutting a master. Then that master goes to plating and galvanics. And so what happens is they actually spray the lacquer or the piece of copper that the files are cut into a bath of silver, and then they grow a stamper, which is like, it's the most Harry Potter part of the actual record making process.
That's
because
true.
It's alchemy, it's science, it's chemistry. Those people are incredible wizards, and they grow a stamper molecule by molecule. And sometimes a 1-step process, sometimes it's a 2-step process, sometimes it's a 3-step process. And they make a mother, a father, whatever part they're looking for. So like whatever, however many stampers you need to make, that's going to determine how many little steps you need to do. You can go listen to the Women in Vinyl podcast about stampers if you want. And then those stampers go to a pressing plant, whatever pressing plant you have decided that is your du jour, whether that's Furnace with Jen, whether it's Kindercore in Athens, Georgia, whether it's Clampdown Record Pressing in Vancouver. There's numerous and various pressing plants, but that's where your stampers go. And that's those are the 3 major steps to making vinyl in the pressing plant room.
Yes.
Anything to add, Jen?
No, I mean, I really would encourage people to go listen to the podcast, like not just for Women in Vinyl plug, but truly to understand the process better, especially if you're going to make a record, because you might go in thinking that you're needing a 3-step process for your plating and you don't. And that is sort of the magical land of vinyl that people don't understand at all. So, yeah.
Yeah, if you guys just listen to the whole podcast series so far, by the end of listening to the podcast, you are gonna sound like you're one of us, people who work in the industry. Like, knowing all these insider info is gonna be so empowering for you as an indie artist. But I think we should answer Lathe's question here. It's relevant to this slide.
So when your lacquer is sent to plating and it's sprayed to go into the bath, you can create a father or a master, which if you're doing a 1-step, that father or master would then become your stamper. If you're doing a 2-step, then you're creating a father and a mother, and then that mother will make your stampers. So if you're doing a 2-step, though, the father becomes sort of like a free stamper. So you don't have a backup. And so a mother can make a certain amount of stampers. And after those stampers, or after the mother's worn out from making too many babies, then you would have to go back to a cut. You don't have any backup. So if you were going to do a large run, then you would probably want to do a 3-step plate, which means you have your father, which can make more mothers, which can then make more stampers. If you're doing like 500 pieces or less, then you only need a 2-step because you're going to have enough off of that mother to get through your run. So, It's just sort of a family way, I guess, of explaining.
And also, I think what has helped me understand the process when I was just starting out, the mother, like in the whole process of electroplating or galvanics, you end up with a positive or a negative copy of the record. So a vinyl record has grooves, right? And when the needle is dropped on the disc, the needle tracks on the grooves, and you get to hear the music. The negative, when you make when you in the electroplating stage and you drop that master onto the bath of liquid nickel, what ends up being created is the metal master that gets pulled off of that physical master, and what you end up is having a negative copy
Positive.
of it's negative first because it's like taken from the lacquer. Oh,
I
Yeah,
just post.
it's positive because it has ridges, and then
I-
you plate that, and then you get the stamper.
no, when I say negative, it's like the now it's like we're
No.
all confused.
And
But
that's-
negative is like the flip.
I just posted a little resource that I created
There
for
you
the
go.
website. So you can, if you click on that, it's a visual that will show you both positives and negatives with the electrocharge, and then like how it step by step goes. Yeah.
So the stamper is like the negative of the actual record.
It's
So
a brain
when you-
twister.
yeah, that's why we have a podcast, and the best way to really get deep into the whole world of vinyl is to check out the Women in Vinyl podcast. But yeah, this is like a very general explanation of the different stages in the manufacturing process. There's a lot of moving parts, and that's essentially what happens when you want a physical copy of your music. So let me uh, introduce the next stage of our slides. What are your options? I think this is the thing that's going to be most important for you as the indie artist, is to know all the different avenues that you can take to release your music as a final record. So Jen, can you talk to us about all the options we have?
Yeah. So to start, you could work with a pressing plant. Obviously, this would be my preference. The reasons is that it's going to be more cost effective for you because you can sort of shop around, find the best place for your needs, for the quantities that you want. It cuts out a middleman, which would be a broker. Sometimes brokers have discounts at plants, but even with those discounts, you're going to have to cover the price of the pressing, but then you're going to have to cover, their cost, the shipping, everything. So it's a little bit more expensive. And you have more control over the final output. And also going back to, educating your end consumer, you will know directly when there's an issue, if there's an issue, and be able to then pass that along immediately versus sort of a game of telephone. Right now, I think for the independent artist, it's super important to understand and look around for your options. We're going to be creating a resource, but in the meantime, if you go to vinylpressingplants.com, you can find a million different pressing plants out there in all kinds of different locations, and it shows their minimums if they press 7-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch. But right now, I think that's important. We talked to a couple of different plants over the course of this past year podcasting, and one takeaway that I found was plants with different numbers of presses, or sort of understanding and finding who their best customer was. A plant that has a couple presses is not going to be pressing Adele, for example. So they're not taking on a lot of major label work, and I think that that's a big misunderstanding. Is everybody thinks that every pressing plant in the world was pressing these releases, and they're finding that they're tailored more to being able to do a shorter run of 300 or 500 pieces. Whereas plants that have more machines and are sort of taking on larger clients, be that an indie label or major label, it's easier for them to put a run of 5,000 on and let it go versus having to swap out color after color after color because there's just more machines and everything to manage. So if you reach out to a plant and they're like, we're booked, we're not taking on new work. Like, don't get discouraged. Just seek out those pressing plants that are maybe a little bit smaller. It's not like your quality is going to be any worse. Like, they're going to be quality controlling as well. So just keep kind of shopping around and understand that your turn times right now, be it through a broker or through a pressing plant, are going to be, almost a year.
And also before, somehow I had one client who had this misunderstanding, but if you're based in one location, it doesn't mean that you have to find a pressing plant that's close to your location.
Oh yeah, no. Mm-mm.
Yeah. So definitely don't have your location affect your decision making when shopping around for a pressing plant. It's very common for our facility here in Los Angeles to be sending vinyl masters to Germany,
Mhm.
to Japan, and and it's good to keep that in mind when you're shopping around. All right. Are you good with the first option, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay. Take it away.
Yeah. So option 2 is to work with a vinyl broker, someone like Pirates Press, Sound Performance, Groove House, and basically the good part about this would be that you tell them what you want, and then they shop around all of those pressing plants for you and find the best place for what your needs are. The downside is that you don't have as much creative process with like your design stuff, and how that may work. Like if you want to, emboss a jacket or do something special with your print, you'd have to tell that to them. They'd get a quote. The pressing plant would have to get a quote. So it's a lot more middlemen going into that. You also don't have, again, direct access to the plant. So if there is an issue, it kind of has to go through the broker to go to the plant and then back. So, yeah, I mean, I think if personally, I would want to be more involved with my release if it was sort of my musical baby. So, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the difference. Sometimes it may not be obvious that someone is a broker. So I think, asking those kinds of questions up front is helpful, especially if you're someone that is in a place where you want the country of origin to be pressing your record. Because sometimes, for example, the cheapest plant may not be in the US if you were based in the US. And so it may be going overseas to the Czech Republic. And if there were any sort of issue with that, you would want to, again, kind of ask those questions up front.
And sometimes one of the things that we try to make clear when indie artists go for the broker route is that sometimes you don't know where well, many times you don't know where or how your music is being cut or pressed. There, it's basically a mystery how your product's going to be manufactured. So it's good to keep that in mind. But one other benefit that I found with the broker is that they have some options for you when you're raising funds for your vinyl record. Like for crates, they do like a fundraising right at the beginning of you releasing your vinyl record. So if you raise like if you're able to have 100 orders for your vinyl records, then that triggers the manufacturing. So there's a lot of like innovation in terms of the fundraising methods with the vinyl broker, but keep in mind that you are kept in the dark as the artist. So
yeah, and I could walk through just quickly what the process is in submitting for a plant, at least. So if you aren't supplying a lacquer, then you would get a quote from the plant. You would supply your digital audio. It should be mastered for vinyl, ideally. And then we would send that to a cutter. Different plants work with different cutters. And then once that's done, we send it to the plating facility. That gets plated based on your needs, just sort of like we explained before. When we do that part of the process for you, if something happened during your test pressing phase, say like there was an issue with the cut, or it got damaged in plating, then we would handle all of that for you in getting it recut and replated. If you were supplying a lacquer, then you would have to go back to the cutter and then get that redone and sent back in. So I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion there. So you get your test pressings. Those are typically about 5 copies that you're going to listen to. They're coming off the press where the stampers are just getting warmed up. So unless there's an issue that's across all 5 of those test pressings, then they should be passable. But you're listening for things like consistent issues, making sure your sides are correct, making sure that all the tracks are there and they're in the right order. And then once those get approved, we would order your print, get your production stampers in, and then schedule that for press time. And then once it gets pressed, it goes through assembly, finishing, and then it's shipped out to wherever you need it to go.
All right. So now for the third option that not a lot of people tend to be aware about is lathe cuts. And Robin here is specializing in lathe cuts. So we'll have her talk more about the third option.
Lathe cuts. That's what I do. That's kind of cutting a master and kind of bridging the gap between finished product for pressing plants at the end of the day. There's a few different record lathes out there, especially when you're going to do cutting plastic. So talking to who's actually going to cut your records is always super important. And maybe it's because I am in more of these avenues than other people, but I would want certain people to cut my record based on the records that I like. And if there's anything that I can say about that is like, if you're going to put money into making a physical product, know who's cutting your record, because then you have a little bit more control. If you have a relationship with that person and they get you, your record's going to be that much better just by having that conversation and having that relationship. So that's kind of a little bit of a aside, but I get to have that relationship with almost all of the people that I cut records for. So I get super geeked on the records that I'm making consistently because I have that relationship with those people. And also because I'm listening to that record 30 times, 40 times, 50 times,
200 times.
So sometimes I get to know the record better than the people that made the record. So what I do is I take digital files and I turn them into a piece of plastic that's playable, that's as close to digital source and optimized for vinyl format as much as I can. I work generally in a smaller quantity because I need to cut every single record in real time, one by one. I'm not a record pressing plant, so I can't do 100 copies in 45 minutes. Even if I wanted to, I still like that. The physics.
You can hire a legion of lathe cutters.
The physics don't exist to be able to do that. So in the before times when there wasn't a lot of log jams and backups and pressing plants, my turnaround times were 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the size of run that you were asking me to do. Now it's turned into 4 or 5 or 6 months for me as well, because people are trying to find different ways of getting records out. So there's labels and artists that are trying to do lathe cuts to try and get out of the pressing plant stream to be able to get their product out quicker. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I can do color labels. I cut all of them myself. Sometimes I send them out to like a really wicked sticker maker so that they're like fancier. But I always try and keep everything as accessible and affordable as possible, because I know that you're working on a budget and I'm working on a budget. So I want to make sure that those kind of things align. But at the end of the day, it's still kind of the same thing where I need files on a certain schedule. I need to send your print away. I give you templates. I give you all of these assets. And if there's hiccups, then that puts my timeline back and that puts other people's timeline back. And then you might not get your records in the time frame that you wanted. that I can do a test cut. I can send you a test cut to approve. So it's kind of the same kind of thing as a test pressing. And we can make, small adjustments from there too. I also work with people that do like a Kickstarter crowdfunder kind of an idea as well, because I'm finding that is a little bit more beneficial to people that are working on a budget, where they can just put the cost out right to their people and find out exactly how many copies they need to cut, rather than guess and say, oh yeah, just give me a price for 100. Because when you're working with somebody that's self-funded, not signed to a label, like super indie of indie, you don't know if you're going to sell 100 records. I would love you to sell 100 records of every record that you want to put out, but when you're just starting out, sometimes that's not always the actuality. So being able to get people to have a physical product, put it on the internet, show people what it's going to sound like and what they're going to get, put a price point up, put up a pre-sale and sell those records, and then you come back to me and you say, okay, we're going to do 26. I'm like, cool, let's do it. So then I make you 26 of that record. Then you don't have any wasted inventory, and you don't have anything that you're trying to sell days past. So sometimes that's better to do like a super short run, super limited edition, handcrafted, bespoke. You can add all of the adjectives that you want
bespoke.
to.
I love that word. And just to add to the handcrafted, just to emphasize how handcrafted it is, Robin recently cut a record where you had to draw whales at the back, right?
Oh, yeah. I can go get one. So with Lathe Cuts, we can do a little bit more artistic kind of endeavors as well, depending on how obsessive your lathe cutter is. So I did some clear records for an artist in Cleveland, and we did 2 tracks on the A side, and then on the B side, I hand etched 2 whales, so that there was like an image that was coming through the record while it was playing on the turntable. So I mean, that was like that's a super handcrafted, like specialized idea. I mean, you can do etching on like pressed records, laser, or like
you can do that too.
Yeah. So there's ways to do it, but I was just like, I can be arty, I can do this, and she was super into it. So it was something that we decided to try, and it came out really cool. So I also do picture discs, and so I've been doing those. I do X-ray records. So there's like
literal X-ray.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different parameters that you can kind of do in lathe cuts. Some people silk screen the back of them, so that they don't have to do like album art, and then that way, they have a little bit more physical interaction with their records as well. Sometimes there's different colors that you can get. Sometimes that changes your price point. But yeah, I mean, it's a great way to kind of road test your material if you haven't released records before. See if your audience is maybe receptive to it. Lathe cuts are a really great way of doing that. And there's a number of lathe cutters in the world, and I know most of them. So if you are looking for somebody in your area, let me know, and I can probably give you a reco.
I would say, even from my perspective, a lot of artists are, because of how long it takes for us right now to get a record out, are looking into lathe cuts, to do that bespoke collector piece, to get a single out ahead of the maybe year time frame. So
yeah, and that's the thing. Sometimes it doesn't have to be an LP. We could do a bunch of 7-inch records to just test your single out, and so that way you can do 50 lathe cuts of your single while you're waiting for your press run to arrive, or something like that, so that you can keep that hype machine rolling with your release schedule.
Absolutely.
You're actually, Alicia, there is no cutters in Alberta. I'm from Alberta, but I'm the only one. There's only 3 in Canada total. So unfortunately.
And also, you can do one-offs too. Don't forget that, guys. lathe cuts, and actually even lacquer cutters, we've been asked to cut one-offs.
Rip and
So
ass.
one-offs are great as like a gift, or like maybe a giveaway as an artist to like create hype over your music. So the thing is, like, a lot of there's this misconception that well, the fact of the matter is, when you're really doing a full on vinyl manufacturing process, you're looking into about a minimum of 100 copies. But we always encourage that a bigger run will yield you more profits, because a bigger run has it is less expensive on the upfront costs. But don't forget that you also have the option to do a one-off. You
Yep.
can have lathe cutter cut just one copy of your music as a giveaway, or another option that we've had is like an actual lacquer master one-off. But we always make sure to include instructions on maintaining that, because lacquer discs, the actual material that's used for the vinyl manufacturing process, is much more sensitive and malleable than vinyl records or PVC discs. So you have many options. And again, any questions you guys will have, we'll answer them later at the Q&A portion. Um, okay, so do you guys have anything else to add, or we're good to proceed?
Let's go.
Okay, so it's funny because one of the questions that got asked is, how do you master for vinyl? And we're actually
Perfect
getting to
segue.
that. Perfect segue to preparing your music for vinyl. Okay, question. Should I do anything different production wise if I know I'm releasing my music on vinyl? So the answer is not technically. But again, there are certain factors to be mindful of when you know that you're releasing music on vinyl. So vinyl is very much an old format. It's been around for decades, and its renaissance and its revival now, there's a lot of innovation with the format, but the format still remains the same. But even with the format remaining the same, the music really has evolved. Like we have now, like hyperpop, EDM, and there's so much like trap. All these music that was produced in an era that where you have much more production tools in your disposal. So and these genres were created at a time when vinyl format was created at a time when those genres weren't there yet. So there is going to be some uh, effects when these music gets cut onto a vinyl record, and it's good to keep that in mind when you're releasing your music on vinyl, that certain genres lend itself more to the format than others. So like rock music, acoustic, bluegrass, jazz, those genres live very much comfortably in the world of vinyl. But yeah, some genres, it's good to keep in mind that that you might need to be aware of certain quirks with the format when you know you're releasing on vinyl. So here are a couple of them. Sibilance. Oops, go back. So sibilance is we tend to not really pay attention too much to our sibilance when we're producing music. So what is sibilance? It's the S, the T, the high frequency energy that is really um, dense, and it's usually caused by our S's, T's, like high frequency consonants. And if you don't control that, you don't keep that in mind when you're producing your music and you're releasing it on vinyl, there's a possibility that the sibilance is going to sound like distortion on the vinyl format. Why? um, so I'll try not to get too detailed on this, but a basic explanation is high frequency. It appears on a record as very short, quick grooves or modulations. So the more energetic and intense the high frequency sibilance is, the faster the modulations are, and the shorter the modulations are. And when you don't control that sibilance, the cutting stylus uh, can cut it, but then the playback stylus on your turntable won't be strong enough to physically keep up with the shortness of the grooves, and it just ends up sounding like distortion. So it struggles to trace the high frequency energy on the actual groove itself. So to avoid that, just be mindful of applying a sensible amount of de-essing on your music when you know that it's going on vinyl. Um, Next is low frequency stereo imaging. So, too much of that may cause severe groove lifts or needle skips. So, what is low frequency stereo imaging and how does that manifest in music? So you'll see this a lot in electronic music. So when you have like stereo imaging, like hard panning, especially that is in the very low frequency, like if you hard pan some kick or bass, all these synth basses that tend to like travel in the stereo imaging in your mix. Um, if you don't control that, there's a possibility that the groove on your vinyl record will skip because those effects on your mix, how they're cut on a vinyl record, I'll try to explain this as simple as I can. So the center information on your music, when it's cut on a vinyl record, it's cut in a lateral format, lateral way. Like the actual cutting head moves lateral, but the stereo imaging, how it's produced in the vinyl record, yes, Robin. Um, how the stereo imaging on your music is cut on a vinyl record is vertical. So if there is too much stereo effects and information on the low frequency grooves tend to be it tends to take up so much more space. So if there's like low frequency stereo imaging, there's gonna be severe vertical movement on the grooves, and if it's too vertical, it might go up too high that the cutting stylus will only cut like a very small amount of information on the disc, so the groove ends up becoming really thin, and sometimes the groove might even like disappear for a moment, and that's what's going to cause your needle skips. So it's good to keep in mind how to avoid this. So it's just be aware when you're producing music that this might happen, but I really discourage artists from like suddenly changing their production because they just know, oh, I know I'm going to release this on vinyl, because at the end of the day, your cutting engineers will have tools to control those. But again, it's just important to keep in mind. Just be mindful to not get carried away that your entire music's just going to be out of phase. So be careful. Um, but how cutting engineers prevent needle skips from happening is they usually just a very steep high pass filter all the way at the very bottom of the frequency range, like 20 hertz. That can usually already fix that, but sometimes um, uh, a steeper high pass filter at around 50 hertz might cause that. Might prevent that from happening. But one thing that vinyl cutters tend to do is they have tools that allow them to mono the low frequency stereo imaging. Um, so that's really cool. That's a technique called low frequency crossover. So again, we I discourage you from making your mix mono and making your low end mono. Don't let your production creativity be affected by knowing that there's some limitations on the vinyl format, because cutting engineers will have tools to control that. It's just good to know, just good to keep in mind. Now, the music programming, track order, and length per side. So this is where you will have a lot of control as the producer when you're releasing your music on vinyl. Um, Length per side is very important. You don't want your music to be super long on each side of the vinyl record, because the nature of the format itself, the innermost diameter on the vinyl format, there's going to be some quality loss. There's going to be some degradation on the high frequency. So you would want the length of music on each of your vinyl sides to be less than 20 minutes long. That's like a really good ballpark. It really depends on the music itself, but um, it's a healthy estimate to keep it under 20 minutes. You will have much more uh, leeway if your music is acoustic, but if it's like a high energy rock record or pop record, you will want it to be under 20 minutes. And you also want to keep in mind that because the innermost diameter in your vinyl format has some degradation to the high frequency, you will want like the more relaxed music on your album sequence to be at the very inside. So if you're able to um, sequence or resequence your music so that the most relaxed, chill, less energetic songs in your album is at the innermost diameter in your record, you get a better chance of having a great sounding album from beginning all the way to the end.
Um, and to interject there, Alicia has a question on how many tracks that you should have and does it matter and affect the cost? And I think the length is really...
Yeah, it
Yes.
is the length.
Yeah.
Like we would cut soundtracks that are like 20 tracks per side, but because each song is like just 30 seconds or 1 minute, you're able to put in more music per side. So like what Jen said, it's more of the length of the entire side that matters more than the number of tracks. It's not going to affect your cost. What will affect the cost is the number of sides. So if you're for example, it's a very long 50-minute let's say 60-minute album. So if it's a 60-minute album, you're kind of like looking into 30 minutes of music per side, and that is um, all of your vinyl contacts are going to say that it's going to be too long.
Yeah.
So what we would recommend is to release it as um, 15, yeah, like instead of two sides, you can come up with 3 or 4 sides, but then that will incur a lot more cost in upfront cost. One thing we would suggest is to lessen like trim down the number of songs that are going to make it into your vinyl release. Maybe have some as like a 7-inch format or like special edition, so you have a lot of freedom. Just if you're very set on a certain sequence, just keep in mind that if you're like hard hitting epic music is track 5 on your on side A, that's probably not going to be the best sonically. Do you guys have anything to add to this, or should I proceed?
No,
No,
I would just say acoustic music. So instruments that exist in nature and in physical format are kinder to vinyl. Digital
Agreed,
music is made
100%.
for digital playback. So we love that you've made this incredible ambient record with drone noise and all of this kind of stuff. That might not translate on vinyl, and you're going to have to understand that.
Yeah, just manage expectation.
Yeah, just because you've been able to create music doesn't mean that we can put it onto vinyl.
I think it's also important to mention, because we did talk about 45 RPM as well, that that could potentially, depending on your music, extend you to a 2LP rather quickly as well, because you're going to need more space for those.
Yeah. Track order is super important, and when you start to get an increased cost, Alicia, it's also because sometimes lacquer cutters can squeeze a record to get 23 minutes on a side or 24 minutes on a side, but you're going to pay for it. So, if it's like, oh, well, the record is 42 minutes and they're like, okay. But again, that's why it's super important to know who's cutting your record.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
conversation, and you can be like, oh, well, looking at this, what do you think? But it's also like, don't govern yourselves in creative land before you decide that you want to create a physical format.
Yeah, and the pressing plants, like, for example, we work with just 2 cutters, and so we are open about that. And if you had questions or wanted to use someone in particular, like, we would help you with that. And also with, you're asking about speed. I mean, that's sort of your personal preference. Your cutter also could probably help with that too if you had questions.
Yeah, like 45 is a higher fidelity because the record travels faster. Sometimes we'll make an educated decision on how we're going to cut a record if it's up to us as cutting engineers, whether we're going to cut something at 33 because it sits nicer and you need more time for that bass to have a big swoop, and you have more time for it to be able to travel that long. But then there's other people that are trying to circumnavigate formats a little bit and be like, oh, can you cut me 7 minutes on a 7-inch record? And I'm like, no, I cannot, and I will not. Because you need to understand those formats are engineered specifically for optimal playback. So a 7-inch record usually shouldn't be cut at 33 RPM because of the geometry of the cartridge actually sitting in the groove. So the farther that the cartridge goes in towards the spindle, that needle might distort depending on the way that your tone arm is oriented. So if it's playing at 33, you might start to get groove distortion that's not actually on the record, but it's because of the way that your needle is sitting in the actual groove.
Or it'll sound really quiet if it's really long. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are some of the considerations that we need to make when sides start to get really long, where it's either going to be distortion that we can't manage, or you're going to lose a lot of overall level just because we're like, okay, well, to be able to fit all of this on here, we got to cut like 2.5 decibels off of your overall level to fit all of this on here. So again, like understanding your genre. So like a banging hip hop record, maybe an EP, maybe 2 tracks on a 12-inch. That's it. Like we can't, just because you want to do something doesn't mean it's all possible. So to be able to have those conversations is very important. But again, like knowing who's cutting your record and talking to them about what they're able to do and like understanding what they do well. You know, Jet cuts a lot of pop records, a lot of video game soundtracks, and a lot of like ambient, EDM, all of that kind of stuff. I will, but I don't love it. So.
Oh yeah, like I would spend an entire night just doing test cuts and adjustments if it's an EDM record, totally. Because like what Robin is saying, EDM isn't necessarily like the kind of music that exists organically in nature. And like the cutting engineer will have to be strategic about setting their session before anything gets cut on the vinyl master.
And one of the other things I would say is that there's a lot of people that are out there branding themselves as mastering engineers. That doesn't also necessarily mean that they have had success with their master in the vinyl setting. So a good question for that person is, have you had a successful record cut from your master? And that's not being shady. That's just getting your money.
Saving you time and money.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If they get their nose out of joint because you asked them that, find a different mastering engineer.
Yeah, you are empowering yourself as an indie artist by asking all these questions up front. And also just to add regarding the speed question, this is funny, and since Robin mentioned that I've also cut a lot of video game music releases, this is funny because we would also cut records that are short enough that we are able to cut it at 45 perfectly. And when the album is short enough that we are able to consider the 45 RPM master, we have that conversation with our client and we'll let them know that you are going to get much more fidelity if you release your music on 45. But then we would have clients who know that their audience are just really casual listeners, and they collect the vinyl because of it being a physical format and they want to own it, but not necessarily audiophile audiences who know what 33 is versus a 45. It's easy to write 45 on your jacket, and you should. If you are going to be releasing your music on 45, don't be Taylor Swift and not write it there. Make sure that it's clear to your listeners. But we've had clients who chose to stay in 33 and a third RPM because um, they've dealt with situations where their audience just never thinks of changing their turntable to 45.
Yeah, same.
So it's good to know your audience and make the decisions that accommodate your demographic. And also to add to what Robin was saying about um bringing down the level of your music. So if you check out the slide, all these situations, sibilance, low frequency imaging, and fidelity loss of the inner diameter of your record, those things can be alleviated if the cutting engineer just brings down the level of your music on the format. So that's the easy answer. However, you're also fighting with the fact that the format itself has surface noise. So if if so the shortcut is you bring down the level, but then you are going to be fighting with surface noise. So that's just good to keep in mind. So it's nice to know that you're controlling your sibilance and severe stereo imaging from the get-go, if you know that it's not really adding much to your music. So yes.
I guess I just want to go back real quick. This isn't really as relevant to this topic, but in knowing your audience too, I just want to mention here that for an indie artist, don't feel pressured to do 180 gram vinyl either, because it's not going to make a difference in the sound, in how it's plated or anything like that, and it can be much more expensive because you're using a lot more material. So I just wanted to, while we're saying know your audience and we're talking about sort of getting your audio to vinyl, that, you know, if you have an audiophile audience and that's going to make a big difference to them, then, you know, maybe that's something that you want to look into. But for general public, you know, you can save quite a bit by 140 gram and it's not going to sound worse.
Yeah.
So since we're on this slide, actually I am going to move on to the next slide because someone left a question that's relevant to the next slide. So additional tips when you're delivering music for vinyl cutting. So these are good to keep in mind. Number one, and it's going to be important if you're releasing your music for the first time, is to have a catalog or scribe number ahead of time. And if you're releasing music for the first time on vinyl, you're probably asking, what is a catalog or scribe number? Is this something that I have to register for? Nope. It's something you just completely make up. So it's a short string of alphanumeric characters that you have to decide from the very get-go, which will be your identifier for your project as you go through along the final manufacturing process. Because on the actual disc itself, you're not really able to distinguish one from the other except for the scribe number that's etched literally onto the disc. So it could be anything. Like it could be like 3 characters and numbers. So like
yeah, generally, like a label will have the first 2 letters of their label. So like Dynalone Records here in Canada, their scribe numbers are DA and then whatever numerical number the release is. So it could be DA 150 because that's the 150th record that they've put out on vinyl.
Yep. Yeah, so we could be like WIV001.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be up to you. But the reason why I say this, that it's good to have this ahead of time, we would receive vinyl cutting orders, and we will not know the catalog number while we're cutting. And the thing is, there are times where we'd have to have the plating facility etch the code since we don't have it, and the client is like working on the tight deadline. If we're working on a tight deadline, have the catalog scribe number ahead of time, because that just makes sure that your production line is going to be efficient as possible, and your cutting engineer is not like sitting on the side as waiting for your catalog number, because the manufacturing process, like, it doesn't go down the pipeline if we don't have it from the get-go. We're not
the
going to
plating facility has to write it backwards, and they don't.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're exactly. So yeah, it's very important to have that scribe number from the very beginning, because that is going to be the only way that your master will be identified throughout the production line. So keep that in mind. Next is kind of related. Deliver your master for cutting as early as possible. So remember the turnaround times, even for lathe cuts, it's gotten a bit longer. So besides managing expectations for your audience, also be realistic that you have to submit your masters ahead of time. And in addition to the actual master, also submit your artwork on time. Fill out your orders on time. Your pressing plant will not fulfill your order until you put in your down payment. So um, your the facilities are really only gonna trigger the manufacturing process if we have all the assets for us to proceed. So now the third entry here, which is gonna help the question right here, like there was one question here that said, as a mastering engineer who's never had a release on vinyl before, what are some tips and tricks for the first release to go smoothly? And this is going to be helpful for mastering engineers, and it's not only limited to mastering engineers. This is something you can follow if you're also your own producer or artist. If possible, deliver fully assembled side A and side B wave masters to your facility. Every facility and lathe cutter will have their own preferred specs when you deliver your masters, but sending them a fully assembled side A wave master and side B will lessen the margin of error for sequence and spacing. So if you're the master engineer and you're sending masters that are like track 1, track 2, track 3, there will be a small possibility that there's going to be a mistake in sequencing. Like if there's more moving parts in the production, there is a possibility of like something being moved and nudged so that the sequences is wrong. So even the spacing, like it's very important when you're releasing an album that spacing is also a part of the musical experience. And if you're submitting individual tracks for vinyl cutting, that is potentially going to affect the spacing in between your music. So if you're really wanting to make sure that you retain as much of the that that sequence and spacing, you give them a fully assembled side A, like just one single audio track. And one thing I didn't you're gonna add something, Robin?
Yeah, I just wanted to interject with one thing.
Yeah.
If you're getting a mastering engineer to send your tracks to the cutting engineer, as mastering engineers, please send those masters to the band or to the artist to double check them and
Yes.
them before you send them to the cutting engineer, because we've never heard that band before. Sometimes this is the first time that we're hearing that band or that artist, so we don't know necessarily what it's exactly supposed to sound like. So as peers, when you're sending us files, we're taking that on faith that this is the accurate and true version of what needs to be put into a physical format. So I'm going to a little bit of an anecdotal story here. So I got contracted to do a bunch of 7-inch records for a punk rock band.
I remember this.
Yeah.
I want to hear this.
Pretty crazy, like screamy, and like I love it. I love screamy rock, screamy metal. Like I'm here for it, no problem, no judgment. But this is the first time I'm ever hearing that band. I got an A side and a B side. I cut the A side and the B side. I sent them away, and I was like, the B side sounds kind of weird, but B sides sound kind of weird. Sometimes that's like traditionally that's your experimental side. That's where you put the song where you're like, they might like it or they might not, like whatever. Maybe it's a filler song. The band calls me, like emails me a few days later, and they say, these are awesome, but the B-side is 2 songs mixed on top of each other.
What?
Yeah, so when the mastering engineer bounced the mix out and bounced the final file, he put 2 songs together, but when I got the files, I saw one waveform.
What?
There wasn't.
That's new.
They were the same length, so there was like the song sounded like messy, but it was cohesive, and they ended at the same time.
I was just esoteric. punk.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
this is a choice, but I'm not going to say that your music is bad. That's not my decision. So they were like, what are we going to do? And I was like, well, this is the master that I was given. I was like, did you listen to your masters? And they're like, well, no. And I said, well, there's literally there was no way for me to know what your band sounded like, and there was also no way for me to understand that that was two songs layered on top of each other.
Oh my
Because it was
gosh.
it is one waveform. So if you're not, as an artist, if you're not checking other people's work, then you're doing yourself a disservice as well, because it is a physical format. And so if there's a mistake on it, there's no takesies backsies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to move forward with it. You need to change a sticker. You need to be like, oh, hey, super experimental B-side, whoa, or something. But there was literally nothing that I could do. And
That happened with your test pressings too. Like, listen to your test pressings. Don't just assume, because I had a pretty large band submit a project, and they came back and said the test pressings songs were out of order.
Oh
and
gosh.
sent them so I sent them the track list that they submitted, and turns out that the studio that the audio files came from, both members of the band assumed the other had signed off on them, but
Oh my god.
the studio could see if anybody had opened the folder, and neither of them had opened the folder. So they both just said okay and passed it along. So yeah, you have to check all of that stuff along the way.
Yeah. So again, like the mistake in sequencing will be eliminated if the mastering engineer or the artist submits individual tracks. And also don't forget that if you're sending a fully assembled side A and side B wave file, make sure to include timestamps for each side. Mastering engineers have an easy way to create this by exporting a PQ log, but I'm not gonna go into detail on that. You can even just list down the timestamp, because if you don't list down the timestamp, if you're submitting fully assembled side A and side B, the vinyl cutter will not know when to indicate where the song starts on your vinyl record. Like, you want to know where to drop your needle when you want to listen to song 3. So one thing I did not add to this slide, but is going to be helpful for the master engineers in our panel today, is that again, every pressing plant will have different specs, or every vinyl cutter will have different preferred specs. But in the vinyl world, you are not really competing for loudness, and different cutting lathes will have different just cutting levels.
Yeah.
So if you're able to deliver masters that have more headroom, like even just 5 dB more headroom, and you're not really pushing on the limiter, um, I encourage you to deliver that in high resolution format if possible. But if you guys have any questions that wanna go into more detail on that, let me know. Feel free to reach out to us, or to drop a question in the Q&A. But the point is, even if you just submit the actual master that is going to be delivered on streaming platforms, you will be fine. It will cut on a vinyl record, and your vinyl cutters will have tools to make sure that your digital masters will cut on the vinyl disc. But if you really want to go get the best sound possible, then there are ways, which is like having more headroom and delivering in high resolution and then sample rate.
Yeah,
So
give us the dynamics, baby. We'll our job is to make it sound as bitchin' as possible.
oh yeah,
we don't want to make a bad sounding record, because it's bad for business and it's bad for you, and then that's bad for business. So if you give us the tools to do our jobs to the best degree of our ability, then you're going to get a great record. Like, we've all seen the brick wall sausage master, and we're just like, oh, okay. And I mean, you don't get a lot of like sauce on that, so you can't really do a whole bunch more with it. Yeah, if you give us lots of dynamics, lots of headroom, no limiters, please, then that that's a dream scenario. We'll make
That's
it
gonna sing.
we'll
Yeah.
make it as loud as we can possibly make it. I mean, loudness wars don't really exist in vinyl, thank God. But we want it to sound great on all of the playback systems. So
Yeah, and to reiterate from a pressing perspective, like these conversations are so important because we can't change anything. So like if you listen to your test press and you're like, "Oh, this tambourine sounds loud," or "This sounds too quiet," like that has nothing to do with us. Like we are stamping something out into plastic, So like we're not adjusting levels or doing anything like that. Like once we get that cut, that's what we're working from. So if you've already gone over all of these things with your cutter and your mastering engineer, then they should transfer appropriately to us pressing them. But yeah, we don't do anything with the files once we get them.
Yeah.
Always try to listen to your test pressings on at least a couple of playback systems.
Yes, please.
So again, there's many other factors that you can read up more if you know that you're going to be releasing your music on vinyl. But this is really less of a shameless plug and more as a resource. But I've written an article on mastering for vinyl or releasing, preparing your music for a vinyl release on this link that I included. So I found that a lot of actual vinyl cutters really found that article helpful too. So I encourage you guys to read that article. And for those that are going to be watching this panel on video later and it's not seeing the chat, if you go to isotope.com and just Google mastering for vinyl, you will find that article. All right. So moving on. Selling and distributing your record. Miss Robin, can you tell us where we can sell our vinyl records?
Yeah, so selling and distribution has kind of changed in the last few years as we've moved into online sellers and into Shopify and Instagram store and all of those kind of different mediums. So you don't necessarily have to go with the traditional brick and mortar record store these days, which is empowering to the independent artist because it allows you to fully utilize your engagement with your fan base, but also to be able to utilize the internet so you can market it to different parts of the country or different parts of the world. As long as you're willing to ship somewhere and you know how to ship a record, you'll be fine. You can do consignment with record stores. Maybe your local record store is like a big fan of your band or you as an artist, and they're like, yeah, no problem. And you can work out a consignment deal. You put your own records in there. There's CD Baby, there's Indie Pool, there's numerous and various different ways and platforms to use as distribution agents. There's also Bandcamp. We love Bandcamp. And Bandcamp is also one of the incredible ways to maximize keeping your proceeds from selling your physical format, but also like selling your streaming format too. So check with your local record store. You might check with like a distribution agent like A to Z or the lovely and talented Amanda Schutzman from our very first episode of the Women in Vinyl podcast. She has the wherewithal to work with over 100 stores on the East Coast, and she facilitates getting releases and different records in all of those stores as well. She grew up in a record store, so she kind of has the insider information on how to do all of that as well. There's also one-to-one. I mean, when we all get back to going to rock shows and live shows, selling records at shows is the best. I found that people are more willing to spend money on a record rather than another piece of merch, whether that could be, again, another black t-shirt or a koozie or something else, but they feel like they're getting more for their money when they're getting a piece of that tangible format. So there's numerous and different ways. There's even like all the independent labels now too are doing different ways of getting music out there, whether it's like, again, more bespoke, lathe cut, handcrafted picture discs or different formats that way, but also splits. So one band on one side, one band on the other side. Then that way you split the upfront cost two ways, and then you split the profits. You access numerous fan bases as well. So one band might have this side of the market, one band might have this side of the market, and then you are like, oh, hey, we're doing a split, and then you get all of it, and that is the best. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, and I'm here for all of it.
I have a question actually. I am curious because there's also this business model of vinyl subscription, and I'm curious. How is do you guys have any information if, as an indie artist, there's a way to get into those subscription services and be considered for it?
There's a few niche models like Pop Punk Takeout. They are a curated pop punk centric vinyl and merch subscription service. So they actually like send you a pizza box.
What?
It's got a bunch of, like, it's got 7-inch records or 12-inch records and t-shirts and patches and stickers and keychains and all the different things. And it's a different curated box every quarter right now. And
That's
they're
cool.
going to move into a monthly kind of thing. But there's like different little ideas that are popping up in the market for people to try and get more of their music out there in different ways. But as far as like a Vinyl Me Please or Sounds on Vinyl, I haven't really seen a lot of indie representation through those. It seems like they're very much more the record of the moment, making everybody get it kind of deal. I mean, Mo-Fi's a little bit different. They've got
they typically sign in with the label to do like a X amount for their releases. So like if ATO is putting out something, for example, like Vinyl Me Please might do their own edition of units of those. So we would like ship that out as part of the run.
Yeah.
And what was that called again? Alicia was asking. That pop punk.
Pop Punk Takeout.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I know that and we mentioned this before, but another option is like, although I prefer working directly with pressing plants, Crates, QRATS, allows you as an artist to sell your vinyl records to do a fundraising first, and then that's when your vinyl record gets released when they've already fulfilled their order. So that's also one option. Anything else? I know that Bandcamp is like doing like a vinyl broker situation down the road. I'm not sure. I've only heard the news.
They did it with a certain amount, and you had to like qualify and like pre-sale a certain number of units.
It's kind of like Crates.
And only if you got to that number would it be funded. So there was an artist that I was working with from Wisconsin. And he's like, oh, I'm being considered for Bandcamp for vinyl. And I was like, hey, cool, whatever. And then he only pre-sold like a certain number, and he was like, they're not going to fund me. But he was glad that he had started to talk to me, because then I could just like pull the trigger and do
exactly
however many copies he actually sold. So that was good. But yeah, they got a lot. I will say, like, obviously they're a business, but they are starting like a kind of more of a vinyl side. And it's like in its infancy, and it's starting to grow, but I don't know if it's going to be like a specific plant or what the infrastructure is going to be around it. There's been some like low level conversations because the person in charge is a lady type, so we're obviously keen on chatting with her. So
yeah, that's cool.
2020 will probably be able to answer more of those questions.
Yeah, so what we recommend is to like follow Women in Vinyl. Just follow the website, the podcast, or the social media, because we're gonna do as much as we can to educate the independent community on what options are going to be available. But again, keep in mind that if you're going to be working with a vinyl broker, that you won't have much more control over the production process. So just keep that in mind.
You have to sell 250 units for Bandcamp.
Good to know.
To do it. So I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of recce's.
All right. So now that you've gathered all that vinyl records, and you're ready to release and sell your vinyl records as an indie artist, you also want to make sure that you don't ruin your vinyl records as it's about to get shipped. So, Jen, can you tell us more about how to properly maintain and care for our vinyl records?
Yeah, so basically you just want to make sure that you're keeping them vertical. You don't want to stack them horizontally on top of each other. The weight will begin to warp them. You want to keep them in a cool, dry place. So, yeah, not out in the sun. Once they're opened out of shrink wrap or whatever, I personally prefer to store them in poly bags. I know there's some, people have different feelings on that. It will just make sure that when the jackets are rubbing together on and off the shelf, that's kept safer. Some people prefer to keep the vinyl outside of the jacket, behind it in a poly bag. Up to you. And then cleaning your records, especially if you are buying something. I mean, this obviously isn't tailored to this, but if you're buying, from the used bin, for example, you really want to make sure to clean that record when you get it home before you put it on your turntable. And we love Groove Washer, so I'll just shout them out as a recommended cleaning solution. It's a really great one, but a lot of record stores sell their own as well. And then keep your equipment, dust free, in good working order. Watch your cartridge, make sure that it's not it's not worn out. So yeah, I mean, just take care of your stuff. Some examples of storage solutions. I think the big one that everybody knows is Kallax, which you can get at IKEA. It's really, I mean, I don't know what it could have been made for besides vinyl, because it's perfect for it. There are some other, independent retailers that are making really bespoke, gorgeous pieces. Like we talk about Wax House Co. They're a US-based, women-owned vinyl storage solution. And then depending on how organizational you are,
Or not
or not at all in Robin's case, there's some good record dividers by a company called Keppel, also women owned. Really love them. They create record blocks. So if you're listening to your record, you have somewhere to kind of stand it. Flip bin is another one. But Keppel also makes really great dividers that you can make custom. So if you have a bunch of your records that you collect and then you are receiving your records, you can, have a custom one like for sale. So yeah, lots of great products and things out there for your records.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I know that we've answered questions as we went along the presentation, but if you guys have any questions, now is the time to ask. But while we're waiting for people to leave in their questions, let's are we still doing the raffle on the Women in Vinyl social media page?
We are.
Tell us more about it, Jen and Robin of Women in Vinyl podcast.
So we have some really great companies that we reached out to that sponsor the podcast that have created and given us product. So as a thank you to everybody that's been listening, we are doing a raffle of 2 different bundles. They include Selector bags, which are really amazing record bags. Keppel and Groove Washer that I just mentioned have donated to that. Glowtronics is a company that makes slip mats. They're also involved. Ortophon, which is a really amazing turntable company. They make DJ and hi-fi cartridges. Eargasm earplugs so that you can protect your ears. And Avid and Pro Tools have both given mega awesome subscriptions as well. So get in on that. Check out our Instagram. We have information on the bundles, listen to the podcast, and leave reviews for a chance to win.
Yeah. Or join us on Patreon and you get automatically entered.
Exactly.
Right. So do we have any questions?
I'm going to duck off camera and grab that etched record.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you guys have any questions, okay. Uh, well, we're glad that you guys all
Yeah,
joined us
thank you
today.
so much.
Yeah. And I know that we've been answering questions as we went along. And if there are any questions that suddenly pop in your head after this panel, don't hesitate to reach us on social media. Oh, okay. Let's look at that etching here. You see?
Yeah.
How badass is that? How many copies did you make of that, Robin?
So I did 50 of these.
Oh my gosh.
So so it's like it's drawing with like a little metal stylus that we would etch or scribe anything in the dead wax. So I did that with 50 plastic records. I like to say it was like the opposite of coloring, because then I just had to do the outline. I didn't have to like pick a color. Um, so it was fun to do at nighttime when it's like cut some labels, etch some records, put your feet up and
That's so cool.
at the end of the day. So that's for an artist called Uno Lady from Cleveland.
Wow.
It's a collab with Wax Mage, my good friend Heath from Gotta Groove Records in Cleveland too. So we're sending it for a super secret second process. So it might get even cooler, but we're just waiting for proof of concept first. But it'll be, if you follow me on Instagram and stuff, it'll come up. I'll put the pre-sale up, because I mean she's super amazing. She brands herself as like a one-woman choir, so she sings through a loop pedal.
So cool.
She doesn't actually do like any instrumentation. It's just her singing through a loop pedal. So she'll sing the seventh, the fifth, the third, the harmony, and then she'll so over and over and over again and loop that, and then she'll sing their main melody over top of it. She's incredible. So yeah.
I have a question, Robin. So I know that you've also cut vinyl on the actual X-ray film.
Yeah.
What other like material have you etched music into? Just to give our attendees like ideas on what's possible with Lathe Cuts.
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is with X-rays, like through the history of cutting X-rays, it's like it's changed a little bit because the actual X-ray film has changed as we got into modern times. So I use the X-ray, but you come up with my own like process to give it a hi-fi twist, because if anybody has listened to an actual X-ray record, they don't sound good. So
it's really for the novelty of it, which is still cool.
Yeah, like, they look cool, and it's rad to have a piece of that. But I am a little bit more like, I would love this to sound good and look cool. So I kind of navigated the research and development waters to figure out a way to do that. And so mine are a little bit different, still authentic, but a little bit, and it's secret sauce. So, but I'm also doing a really cool project with a label here from Toronto called We Are Busybodies, and we're doing vintage National Geographic maps as picture discs.
What?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So those ones are really cool. I've got some like movie film that I'm working with to try and figure that out, and then some like vintage slides, like slideshows that your grandpa would be like, oh, here we were on Lake Titicaca in 1967. Buick, everyone. So I've got some of those, and working with like Polaroid film and some other things. But yeah, like I feel like I would miss all of that if I cut lacquers, because this flexes my creativity a little bit. So yeah, lathe cuts forever.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we've.
When are you guys shutting down shop, Jet? When is the last record that you're cutting for the year?
We are just finishing up Encanto, the Pixar release.
Yep.
So our studio, the bakery, there's 3 of us vinyl cutters. And yeah, we've been doing a lot of Pixar stuff. Thankfully, it's been really exciting. West Side Story we've just cut. I still do a lot of video game music. But yeah, it looks like we have a question from Robin. You have an email you'd be willing to share?
Always.
Yeah, but yeah, just remember, guys, that as an independent artist, don't feel intimidated by releasing your music on the vinyl format. There
Right.
are tons of options that is indie friendly. You don't have to worry about having to order for 500 copies. You can order 100. I know there's even one pressing plant that can do it for 50, which is Mobineco in Taiwan. But oh, that's awesome.
Oh, awesome.
But yeah, you can reach us on all these social media pages and on Patreon, and we're always answering questions and helping out the indie community.
Yeah. Doesn't
Yeah.
you have to ask Lathe specific questions to me. If you want to ask me about pressing plant stuff, no problem. If I don't know, I'll tell you that I don't know. I will find you that answer. I am not a proud human, so don't worry. We have a lot of resources and a lot of incredible humans that give us their time and their answers, and they're so incredible to deal with. So we can
Yeah.
find ways for you to do stuff.
Yeah, and I can always help from the pressing perspective as well, of course.
And also we haven't mentioned this, but on the womeninvinyl.com website, we have a jobs board for anyone that wants to get into the career path of working in the vinyl industry. Different businesses that work within vinyl share their jobs postings on the Women in Vinyl website. So if you're ever curious to enter this world and joining the dark side, go to that website.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we've answered a lot of questions as we went along. So thank you so much everyone for joining us. We hope that we've helped you guys out, and we hope that this panel has empowered you all to release your music on vinyl.